I remember the light in the apartment on Beacon Street in Boston, the way sailors remember a single lighthouse. It kept me steady. It was the summer of 1990, the air sticky with a heat wave the papers called historic, and I was 26, newly graduated from a creative writing program that taught me how to shape sentences and not how to steady my heart. He walked into my life like an argument you want to keep having, quick, sharp, with a laugh like broken glass. His name was Daniel, from a childhood in suburban Connecticut, a scholarship kid turned law student at Harvard, a man with hands that smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon coffee. We met at a reading. He corrected a line I had thought was mine, and I loved him for the audacity of it. I tell you this now as an older woman whose voice has gone softer in the winter. I tell it because the first light is easier to remember than the long dark that followed. We moved like couples do. Small rights, an argument over curtains, the first joint bank account in the fall of 1991. When the country still buzzed about the Gulf War that had ended a few years earlier, when Reagan-era optimism had folded into the cautious economy of the Clinton years. He had a job at a mid-sized firm in downtown Boston. I took temp writing gigs and taught evenings at a community college. On Sundays, we walked the Charles, and he would talk about appellate briefings like they were love letters. I listened, because love and law are both languages of persuasion, I thought then. By the spring of 1993, his ambition had teeth. He was offered a spot in a high-profile clerkship in New York, Manhattan, where the skyline felt like a promise you could buy into. We argued. He tried to persuade me with statistics, with charts he drew on napkins. I tried to persuade him with silence. In the end, he left with 2 suitcases and a sincerity that felt like an apology. He said, "We will be together. This is temporary." I believed him in the way people believe weather forecasts. I learned, much later, that believing is a kind of foolish bravery. The first winter without him, in 1994, I learned how to count the minutes. Boston kept its snow quiet, but my apartment was loud with the absence of someone who used to hum while making tea. Letters arrived from him full of legalese and the busy journalism of a man climbing. He spoke of clerkship dinners, of judges who drank bourbon, of offers in Washington. But he did not say the plain thing, that he had fallen in love with the city as one falls in love with power. I still have one of those letters tucked into a box of old typewritten pages. The paper has yellowed, the ink softened. He wrote, "I need you to understand." I read it until the words lost their edges. When he left me for Margaret, a woman he met at a fundraiser in Manhattan in the summer of 1996, it did not occur with thunder. It arrived in a text nobody can recall because it was the kind of betrayal that is almost nothing. A photograph at an opening, a mutual friend's embarrassed silence, the soft sliding away of his voice. He told me he loved me. Then he married Margaret in a courthouse ceremony 2 months later. The ceremony was small, absurdly small, and the world kept turning. The devastation in me felt private and absolute, like a wound sewn shut with someone else's thread. Grief, for me, did not look like tears only. It looked like work. I worked at the library, then at a nonprofit, teaching adults to write resumes during the late 1990s when the country brimmed with dot-com chatter and excess. I learned to rebuild with quiet industry. Yet there was a part of me, a hot copper coin in my chest, that refused to be rebuilt into simple acceptance. That coin began to think in strategic terms. The first time the thought arrived in the shape of an intention was November of 1999, when the stock market glittered and I realized that all the world's reputations were built of small, combustible things. I do not romanticize my turning. The person who began to plan was someone I recognized in the mirror. The same eyes, a few more lines, and an attention that was as clinical as a surgeon's. It began innocently enough. I stopped answering his messages the way a tide withdraws. I began to retell our history to people who mattered in his world. Former classmates, colleagues, a judge's assistant who remembered him from a pro bono clinic. In those early months, I practiced the art of recollection. The details I offered were true, but their order, their emphasis, their absence of context made them mean something darker. The first damage is never loud. It is a whisper between two people over coffee. In the summer of 2001, when the nation's breath caught on the morning of September 11th, everything that was mundane in the world splintered. I remember thinking about fragility not as a metaphor, but as a lived thing. Daniel had become partner in a reputable firm in New York by then. His photographs, smiling, crisp, appeared in alumni magazines. I watched him from a distance, the way one watches an actor on a stage, present, illuminated, and unreachable. I had learned the libraries of his life, which colleagues preferred whiskey, which clients had thin patience, the names of his staff. This was not espionage, it was memory weaponized. There were small surgical strikes. I was careful. I would call an editor in a legal magazine and say, in a voice laced with reluctant admiration, "Did you know he once dismissed a sexual harassment claim because the plaintiff was young and impressionable?" I would never invent words. I would let implication build the case. Editors like certainty. They liked sources that sounded like they had nothing to gain. I gave them what they wanted, a perspective. Again, I will not give you instructions, only the truth that words, placed precisely, change reputations. The magazine ran a piece with his name in a paragraph of someone else's moral failure. The piece landed like gravel on glass. When the firm investigated, Daniel said my name once, flinging it like a token. He accused a former relationship of unprofessional behavior he had endured as an embarrassment. For a moment I thought, he will settle this with his legal mind. He did not. He turned the narrative in on me without seeing the knife it struck implanted back in his own flesh. He portrayed me as an obstacle. He filed for a restraining order that read like a petition for negligence of boundaries. In court, I listened to people I once called friends repeat my things with judicial detachment. The judge's gavel sounded like a clock. The years between 2000 and 2006 were a slow unraveling for him. For me, they were an education about how fragile institutions are. Friends prompted me to stop. "You are better than this," they said. I remember Mira, who had known me in college, standing on my stoop in late autumn of 2003, breath fogging in the air. She touched my arm. "This will not bring you peace," she whispered. I wanted to be the person who accepted that, but the coin in my chest had grown heavier, more exacting. It required restitution, and the ledger in my head would not balance until something concrete tipped. He lost clients. A partner withdrew an offer after a rumor. The rumor I had seeded and let breathe became a story told over golf club sandwiches. He sounded like a man who had forgotten how to ask for help. His pride had become another kind of possession, polished and impenetrable. His marriage frayed as Margaret read headlines that hinted at moral compromises she had never noticed in her husband's private life. They fought in the kitchen over groceries as if the past had taken the place of their recipes. I watched, not from windows, but from lines in the press and from people who called me to say, "I saw." Around 2007, the financial tides turned. The economy coughed. The country slid into the anxiety of 2008. Daniel had made choices because of fear then. Choices to curry favor, to stay close to people who promised safety. It is easy to be cruel when everyone else is afraid. I added my voice to the existing chorus and watched how fear swelled into action. In a deposition, a client remembered a phrase I had suggested in a conversation somewhere. The phrase grew teeth in someone else's mouth and bit him. He was suspended pending inquiry. The suspension felt like frost on a garden I had once tended with him. I will not pretend I felt no remorse. There were nights in 2009 when I sat in the dark and the city hummed outside as if nothing had changed. The trolley stopped at the corner. Somewhere a couple laughed, a child shouted. In those small life sign moments, I felt the coldness of what I had become. Yet the ledger still demanded settlement. I convinced myself I was righted by a sense of poetic justice. He had left me like a draft, left to blow papers away. Justice, I believed, should look like retribution when law and love both fail you. Public humiliation is a peculiar thing. It rewrites you slowly. There was a gala in the spring of 2010 where he arrived with his jaw set and a practiced smile. An old client stepped forward and, in a small conversation witnessed by a PR person, left a slipping remark about a settlement once mishandled. A smear, the size of a pebble, became a ripple. Margaret told me later, through mutual friends, that she did not recognize the man she had married. "He is quieter," she said. Quieter, or hollowed, I thought. It was hard not to believe the narrative I had spun. It began to look like the truth. One of my proudest moments, and the proudest moments are often the ugliest, was the way he lost his network. People who had once asked for his advice began to distance themselves. College classmates no longer returned his calls. A man you think you know can lose his past just as he loses his present. In 2011, his firm suggested a sabbatical for his well-being. He took it and went away to a lakeside town in upstate New York, where the light is honest and the days are long. Photos occasionally surfaced of him in a sweater, looking older than his years. The world moves on. It has no loyalty to the broken. I believed victory softened me. Instead, it hollowed me. Success in revenge is not like climbing a mountain. It is like living inside one. The life I had left behind, a circle of friends, a small apartment lined with books, the habit of making good coffee in the mornings, stretched thin. People who loved me began to call less. I had gambled things for the sake of a ledger. Sometimes I woke with my hands cold, as if they had forgotten how to hold a hand gently. I tried to justify with moral philosophy and old grievances. Those justifications, in the end, sounded like excuses when set beside the sound of my own breath at 3 a.m. It is a dangerous thing to believe you are the arbiter of someone else's fate. In 2012, I received a letter with a photograph. Daniel on a bench, his face gaunt, a headline folded across his knees. The photograph was from a local paper. The headline talked about rebuilding. My stomach clenched. I thought of the times he had been gentle with me, how he had once traced a scar on my wrist with the tip of his finger and not asked. Memory complicates cruelty. I kept the photograph in a drawer like contraband, and I read it at night, tasting a remorse that did not yet have a voice. Then, in the winter of 2013, something unexpected shifted. I met Henry, a volunteer at the food pantry where I sometimes taught resume workshops. He was slow with speech and quick with hands that fixed things. A loose chair leg, a leaking sink. He brought me coffee one morning in a chipped thermos and listened without trying to rewrite my pain. When you have been very angry for a long time, kindness is unfamiliar. You suspect it. Henry did not ask about Daniel. He asked how my mother was, what book I was reading. I thought I might be saved by smallness. But the ledger is stubborn. My old desire for retribution did not dissolve because someone brought me steady coffee. If anything, Henry's quiet life made me more aware of the cost. He would look at a news story, then at me, then back at the story, and say nothing. His silence had a moral weight I was ill-prepared for. The world offered me a double vision, the satisfaction of a vendetta and the hollow of the life it had cost me. I tried to balance them as if they were plates on sticks. They wobbled. In 2014, an investigative reporter in New York reopened a thread I had thought safely buried. She called me, curious about the edges of the story that had ruined a career. "People change the stories they tell," she said over a recorder. I told parts of the truth and omitted other parts. This, I later realized, is the currency of complicity. Daniel's name returned to the news in a way that felt like smoke in a room that had been claimed. He lay low. He did not come to public defense. Sometimes a person simply disappears into a smaller life and hopes the larger world forgets their name. That summer, he called me. I had a rule not to answer, but in a moment of weakness I picked up. He heard the lines of age in my voice, and for a while the call was nothing but a map of small apologies. He said, "I am sorry for the way I left." I heard the syllables like rain against a roof. "You ruined me," he said finally, and there was no flourish to it, just flat confession rolled out like a tired coin. I wanted to say, "You did not leave me, you chose another life." Instead, I said, "I did what I needed to survive." The call ended as these calls end, with static and unresolvedness. Life folded into routine after that, and then, in early 2016, a new fracture opened. Daniel attempted to come back into public life by publishing an essay about failure and ethics in a legal review. The essay read like a man trying to catalog the damage done to him and by him. I read it on the subway. The paper crinkled in my hands and felt a strange compassion and anger braided together. People began to argue about forgiveness in op-eds and at cocktail parties. Some people thought he deserved a second chance. Others thought reputations, once shattered, are irretrievable. On a rainy October evening in 2017, at a public seminar in Philadelphia about the ethics of legal advocacy, Daniel stood in the back of the room. I recognized the curve of his neck, the way his shoulders carried a stillness that belonged to someone who had learned to move without causing ripples. I wanted to confront him. Instead, I left early, walking in the rain with the city lights blurred. A clip of the evening found its way to a local news feed. Daniel's silhouette leaving the lecture. The feed sparked commentary, some sympathetic, some vindictive. The world continues to judge people in fragments. And then, the thing that neither my ledger nor my remorse anticipated. In the spring of 2019, I received a call that felt thinner than a whisper. It was from a nurse in a hospital in upstate New York. Daniel had been found on the side of a road, they said. He had attempted to end a life I had helped dismantle. The voice on the other end spoke with a clinical softness that made my insides unsteady. I traveled up in a rented car with a map clenched in my glove compartment, the highway a ribbon of gray. I sat by his bedside and watched the rise and fall of the chest that once rose with laughter. He did not recognize me at first. The pills had blurred memory. His hand, when I took it, was paper. I felt triumph flicker like a match and then extinguish. There was a note in his hospital jacket, anonymous, folded twice. I opened it with fingers that shook. The handwriting was neither his nor mine. It read, "You thought you were alone in your anger. You were not. Meet me where the river bends." The paper smelled faintly of river mud. I looked up at the window. Outside, the Delaware flowed on, indifferent and patient. I had thought my story closed. Instead, a new voice had entered the ledger, someone else who had been using the ledger S edges to write their own account. The nurse knocked and said, "The doctor would like to see you." I realized then that my careful architecture of revenge had been only one architecture among many. The cliff rose under me like a stage trap door. This was another incredible story from our channel. Life teaches us that it's never too late for justice, revenge, or redemption. Every story you heard here is real, experienced by people who found strength when everyone thought they were defeated. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What do you think about this situation? Your opinion matters to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. We have new tales of betrayal, intrigue, and revenge every week. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to fight for it properly. Sometimes, the best revenge is living well and showing that it's possible to solve all problems. Thank you for being part of our community. Until the next story, remember, every ending can be a new beginning. See you in the next video.